system that just sort of rewards this very short-sighted thinking. And as we talked about in investing, a lot of people who are good investors or good wealth builders are people who are not short-sighted. They're not what they call myopic. They're not short-sighted. They have a long-term view. They're not into instant gratification. They're into delayed gratification. They're not reactive to problems. They're proactive to prevent problems. So our politicians are not in any of those things. They're not proactive. They're very reactive. They wait till a problem happens and then they react to it as opposed to preventing the problem in the first place. Like the 2008 market crash that almost destroyed the global economy. Obama had to spend $1 trillion almost bailing out bailing out Wall Street, which to me was terrible and corrupt because they should have went to jail and he should have been bailing out Main Street. But this is your system. So they're not proactive. They're very reactive. They're not into delayed gratification. They're into instant gratification because they're trying to get elected for the next 4 years. They're not thinking about what happens after the 4 years are over. They don't have a long view. They have a very short view because of what I just mentioned before. So at some point, what's going to occur, in my view, is that the politicians are going to fight so much that they're going to go ahead and just let the economy go off a cliff. And now, does that mean you should take all your money out of the banks? No. It's not going to be like that. What's going to happen is that one of the things that's going to occur is that you're probably going to see big declines like in the value of stocks. You're going to see some disruptions to the global economy. You would probably maybe see some job losses and things like that. A lot of that would come from a mathematical standpoint. It comes from the fact that most stock prices, most of these models lean on the assumption that the federal government is sturdy financially, that the federal government will never default on its debts. You should never say never, but we say never. And then all the models that model how stock price should look, all the mathematical models, it makes the assumption that government debt has no risk. So what's going to happen is that the world's going to change, and probably irreversibly. I think it'll be the beginning of a pattern or a process that it ultimately leads to China sort of rising as the global economic power and the United States kind of declining. The U.S. is just doing everything wrong. We're not even investing in educating our kids. So how do we expect to compete with China, where they really are making sacrifices today to build their kids up in the future? It's almost like when I was a kid, my mother, I grew up around, my mother, we lived in the projects, in the ghetto, if you will. And I grew up around a lot of ghetto kids, and we did ghetto stuff. But my mother had a different vision for me, and she treated me different, meaning like she didn't spoil me. She made things tougher on me. My father too. My father was a big disciplinarian. He was a cop. They did stuff that other people didn't understand. They did things where they would always tell us, like, I'm harder on you because I don't want you to be like her kids. Her kid's going to end up in jail. Her kid's going to end up dead. And a lot of the kids I grew up with, most of the kids I played with ended up on drugs, in jail, dead, or whatever. And a lot of that was because they just sort of made plans for the future. They invested in us different from the way other people did not invest in their kids. So the U.S. and China are the same way, in my opinion. China invests in its kids. So China is going to have smart kids that grow into smart adults that are on the forefront of engineering. China produces more engineers in a year than the United States, Japan, and India combined. And their engineers are better trained because they're ready to go right on the job. They can get patents in the first year of the job. Whereas our engineers aren't even ready to do the job because they spent 4 years sitting at a university drinking beer for 4 years and studying in between, but they didn't really get the level of training that you get when you're Chinese. I taught in China. It's a very different process. So I don't think taking your money out of the bank is the answer, but I do think diversifying, going back to the Madoff conversation we had earlier, not putting all your money in one place is a rule that should definitely apply. I don't think you should look at situations like this as a way to justify doomsday scenarios. Like, let's stop having those conversations about the collapse of the global economic system and, all this. No, I mean, anything short of, say, nuclear war, God forbid, which is a possibility. It's going to be fine most of the time. Remember, the same way you feel like the whole world is going to collapse economically tomorrow or next year or in the next 5 years, people have been saying that since the 30s. When the Great Depression hit and there was a real collapse, everybody thought, okay, this is the end. We'll never come out of this, blah, blah, blah. They thought of the 1930s as like, okay, this is the finale. Like we've already lived our lives. Like this country's done its thing and now we're on our way down. No, the 1930s was the beginning. It was a long time ago. So you're not really living in the future. You're living a long time ago. In the year 2200, they're going to look at us as old fashioned 180 years ago. And they're going to say, yeah, everybody in 2022, they thought they were really advanced. They thought they were sophisticated when really they were just a bunch of old fashioned idiots that didn't know anything compared to what we know right now. So I think that this government situation is going to be a problem for sure. The US government debt is way too high. The pandemic was part of what drove that, but you got to keep on moving, keep being consistent, keep investing, spread your money out. Don't use that as an excuse to take yourself out of the financial system. I don't think that's very smart. Jan says, hey, Dr. Boyce, I saw your post about Willie D sharing contemporary images of Dr. King. So sad, like you said, nothing's sacred. Yeah, Dr. King is interesting from a financial standpoint because I encourage everybody when I gave my little Dr. King conversation, which I do that every year. Every year I find something worth talking about with Dr. King. I said that, I really, and I didn't know I was going to say it before I said it, but I just sort of think it through. I don't really think we should celebrate who Dr. King was. I think that we should celebrate who Dr. King was going to become. And this is something that I didn't have this perspective 10 years ago, but I have it now because I'm 51. 10 years ago, I was 41. And I did not realize when I was 41 that 39 is very young, compared to 51. If you're 51, 39 seems like a baby, but if you're 29, 39 seems old. And I think about my own life and how differently I view the world at 51 than I did at 39. As you go back, and I was doing the same stuff when I was 39, literally 12 years ago. You can go back and find me doing a million videos and writing a million articles. And I did that because I want to share knowledge, as much knowledge as I can, because I might be dead tomorrow for all I know. And the thing is that if you go back and look at what I was doing when I was 39, which was 2010, I was even politically, I believed in a lot of things I don't believe in anymore. I believed in things like the Democratic Party, and I was probably much more liberal. I used to go on MSNBC, and I used to hang out with Al Sharpton and stuff that I did that I thought was the right thing to do. And then when I realized it wasn't working, that it wasn't, that there was some corruption there. There were some things there that just, like I felt like a rat in a cage. And I said, Black wealth isn't increasing. Like, this is not really helping us. I started to pivot. I changed my perspective and changed my trajectory based on that. I believe that Dr. King was doing the same thing. I believe that Dr. King at 39 was very different from Dr. King at 34. I think that he was realizing that, number one, remember he talked about integration. He said, we're integrating into a burning house. And he said, I don't know if I really need us to be connected to white folks in order for us to be the best version of ourselves. Maybe we're already great even without them, with or without them. And then the second thing Dr. King, I think, started realizing is that this is a wealth game. He gave that speech where he said, we're coming to DC to pick up our check. And he started speaking on things that were more in alignment with things Malcolm X had been saying for years. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think eventually their views would emerge. And it speaks really to the greatness of Dr. King that he was humble enough to accept the idea that he might be wrong, or to accept the idea that his critics might actually have a point. I love that. I sat with Louis Farrakhan for 2 hours one time, me and him, best conversation I ever had. Love that guy. And I remember when I was sitting with him talking, one thing that he mentioned, I asked him, I said, how do you deal with people that just are mean, that just say nasty stuff and don't want to even listen to what you have to say? And he said, you got to listen to your critics because sometimes your critics may be correct. And Dr. King was a man who was humble enough to listen to his critics. And I think he was starting to get some of that message. I think he was still all about love and peace and intelligence. He was super smart and all these things, but he was starting to get to the point where he was like, look, you owe us money. We deserve to own land. We deserve to have capital. We deserve to have our own businesses. And that is, to me, that's the Dr. King that I see when I think about how great this man was going to become. So I don't look at the Dr. King in his 20s and 30s. I see that as a young guy that was trying to figure some things out. I'm looking at Dr. King at 45, Dr. King at 50, Dr. King at 55, Dr. King at 60. I think Dr. King at the age of 60 would have had a very different message from Dr. King at the age of 39. So that because again, it's almost like the way you look at his life could be almost the way you look at the way stocks are valued. Stocks are not valued based on what the company is right now. Stocks are valued on what the company is becoming. They use models to form a trajectory, and they say, based on where you are now, where are you going to be 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? That's how stock prices are modeled mathematically. That's why people get confused when they see a startup company like Tesla being worth more than General Motors. They say, what are you talking about? General Motors sells 10,000 more cars than Tesla. Why would you ever put a higher valuation on a Tesla than a McDonald's or whatever? Well, because they're not looking at what Tesla is. They're looking at what Tesla is going to become once everything kind of plays out. So I think looking at Dr. King from that perspective could be a way to reconcile, to really show appreciation for what he did, while also acknowledging that he was going to probably do things a little bit better as time went on, right? And because I think the economic conversation, that's the conversation that solves most of your problems. If you have a community that is economically fortified, meaning you own land, you own businesses, you can employ your children, give them opportunities, you are in a position of strength that you don't have otherwise. Right now, you're in a position of slavery in a lot of ways. Financial slavery that comes from things like student loan debt, where your debt is so high that you become beholden to a system where you have to work yourself into the grave in this system just to sustain and maintain your debt. And the way they lock you in that system is making sure that you don't have any skills that are required for you to walk away from that system, for you to leave that system. It's just the way a pimp doesn't want to, a pimp doesn't want to have employees that are alert and intelligent and educated and have options. The pimp wants a bunch of women that are hooked on drugs. They have nowhere to go. Nobody loves them. They don't have any skill. They don't have any confidence. They don't have any knowledge, right? That's what he wants. Those are the types of women that he might aim to keep, in his little space, right? So this economy is pimping you. It is designed to pimp you. And if you're not smart enough to prepare yourself to break out of that, then you're going to be stuck in that matrix, in the trap, and just be frustrated your whole life. So let's see. Rarick says, what's the financial difference between an ETF and an individual stock? Well, an ETF stands for Exchange Traded Fund, Rarick, and it is basically a collage, like a composite of different stocks. So you can buy one share of an ETF and get exposure to a lot of different stocks. It's a great way to invest. It's a great way to naturally diversify. I have many, many ETFs in my portfolio. They have different types of ETFs that might focus on different kinds of stocks. So if you go to Robinhood and just look up ETFs, you'll find some really good ETFs in there. All right, let's see here. Let's see. Rarick says, why do you think the stock market is going up right now? It's going up right now largely because people believe the big game right now, the big narrative for the stock market is the Fed. People are, the analysts know that the Fed is eventually going to stop increasing interest rates. And when they stop increasing interest rates, everything's going to be kind of stabilized in the economy. So a lot of people are anticipating that already. The stock market is a forward-looking indicator. What does that mean? That means that they look at the future. The stock market is always looking at the future. So what you're seeing right now, with the market going up, you can have an increasing stock market even in a declining economy. Now, right now, the economy is actually pretty strong and resilient, but there are some analysts who anticipate that the economy could end up going south soon in the next few months because of the Federal Reserve's increases in interest rates don't impact the economy overnight. It's like if I take a pill, that pill may not have an effect on me, for some period of time. Right. So they gave the economy a pill and they're waiting for the pill to take effect. And nobody knows what that effect is going to be. Let's see. Good morning, Dr. Boyce. Are REITs evaluated the same as a corporate stock, or do they have their own criteria because it's technically real estate? You know what? REITs are evaluated not just like a stock, but REITs are evaluated the same way as every financial asset in the universe. And what do I mean by that?